remember that evening with perfect clarity. The light above the dining table was soft, warm, almost comforting, and yet my skin prickled as if the air itself was warning me. We were gathered for what was supposed to be a simple family dinner, laughter floating between the clinking of silverware and the hum of casual conversation. But then, my eyes caught something small, quick, but deliberate. Her hand. It lingered over my glass longer than it should have. Her fingers brushed the rim, almost caressing it, before she set it down in front of me with a smile that was just a little too practiced. And then came the words, sweet on the surface, sharp underneath, a special treat for my favorite mother-in-law. Her smirk cut deeper than any insult ever could. In that instant, the room blurred. I heard laughter, forks scraping plates, someone telling a story about their job, but my focus was locked on that drink. The liquid shimmered under the chandelier, ordinary to anyone else's eyes. But to mine, it was a question. A challenge. And I couldn't shake the thought, why did it feel like this glass was meant to hold more than just wine? I forced a smile, hiding the storm inside me. My son sat across the table, oblivious, beaming with pride at the life he'd built with the woman sitting next to him, the same woman who had just placed that glass in front of me. My heart ached, not because I doubted my instincts, but because I already knew what she was capable of. And worse, I knew she thought I would never dare to call her out. But she was wrong. Very wrong. I waited. I watched. I weighed my options. And in one quiet, unshakable moment, I made a choice. Without anyone noticing, I shifted my glass with hers, trading places as easily as switching seats. It was a simple move, silent, invisible to everyone at that table. Except her mother. The same woman who, years ago, had looked me dead in the eye and called me worthless. That word had clung to me, stuck like a thorn, and now she lifted the glass meant for me and raised it to her lips with the same pride she always wore like armor. 35 minutes later, the laughter faded, replaced by gasps, confusion, and chaos. And I sat in silence, watching, remembering, knowing. Because in that moment, everything I had ever suspected began to unravel. Before I take you deeper into this story, let me ask you, if you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, please hit the like button. It lets me know I'm not alone in this kind of heartbreak. I wasn't always the woman sitting at that dinner table with suspicion burning in my chest. No, once upon a time, I was simply a wife, a mother, and eventually a widow. Life changed for me the day my husband passed away. The house felt colder without him, but I stayed close to my son. He was my anchor, my reminder that, even in loss, love still had roots that held me to this world. When he married, I thought my circle of love had expanded. I thought I had gained a daughter. When I first met her, my daughter-in-law, she smiled wide and spoke kindly, her hands folded politely on her lap. She said all the right things, the kind of things you want to hear when your son is in love. I tried to believe in her warmth. I tried to see her as family. But from the start, there was something about her eyes. They didn't match her words. She could say, "You're welcome here," but her gaze told me, "Don't get too comfortable." And then there was her mother. A woman who carried herself like royalty in a kingdom too small for her crown. From the very beginning, she looked at me with disdain, as though my existence alone was an inconvenience. I will never forget the moment she called me worthless. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't even whispered. It was said plainly, as if it were a fact carved in stone. I stood there, heart in my throat, wondering what I had done to deserve such cruelty. She didn't care. She meant it. Still, for the sake of my son, I swallowed my pride and smiled. I thought love could bridge any gap, that kindness could soften even the hardest of edges. At family dinners, I played the part of the peacemaker. I offered to cook, to clean, to help however I could. But no matter what I did, there was always a jab, always a comment dressed as humor that landed like a blade in my chest. "Oh, we don't cook like that anymore," she would say when I brought a dish. "That's old-fashioned. Times have changed." Or worse, "You must be so lonely rattling around in that big house. Maybe you should think about moving into something smaller." Her words always carried the same hidden meaning. I was in the way. I was outdated. I was unwanted. But I smiled anyway. I laughed it off, telling myself it was better to absorb the sting than to let my son see the cracks forming between us. He was happy with her. He believed in her goodness. And I wasn't about to shatter that for him, not then. Yet unease has a way of seeping into the smallest spaces. I began to notice things others would ignore. The way conversations would stop when I entered a room. The way my daughter-in-law's hand would tighten on my son's arm whenever I offered him advice. The way she would tilt her head and smirk when she thought I wasn't paying attention, like she was enjoying some secret I wasn't part of. At first, I wondered if it was all in my mind. Grief can twist reality, can't it? Maybe I was too sensitive, too defensive. But then came the moments that were impossible to explain away. There were the times she forgot to tell me about family gatherings, only for me to find out later through a neighbor or a stray comment from my son. There were the gifts she gave me on holidays, little things that looked thoughtful on the surface, but carried an edge when you looked closer. A cookbook on beginner's meals, as though I hadn't spent decades cooking for my family. A bottle of perfume with a label that read Eternal Youth, followed by her laugh and the words, "I thought you could use this." And then there was the constant hovering of her mother. That woman had a presence that filled every room, as though she needed to remind everyone she was above them. Whenever she was around, I became invisible. She would tell my son how proud she was of him, how lucky he was to have her daughter, and then cast a glance at me that said, "He didn't get any of that from you." I held my tongue. I let the insults wash over me. But inside, I began to wonder, how long could I keep silent? How long could I let my dignity be chipped away piece by piece? Still, I said nothing, because silence, at that time, felt safer than confrontation. But silence doesn't erase truth. And truth has a way of pressing itself into the open, no matter how much someone tries to hide it. There were nights when I would leave their home after dinner and sit in my car with my hands gripping the steering wheel, heart pounding, replaying every look, every word, every smirk. I told myself to be patient. I told myself to endure. But deep down, I knew something was moving beneath the surface. And then, slowly, she grew bolder. One evening, as I reached for a glass of water at the table, I noticed her eyes flicker. Just a second. Quick enough for most people to miss. But not me. I saw it. That flicker told me more than her words ever could. I began to realize that what she wanted wasn't just distance between us. She wanted erasure. From then on, I watched her closely. Every smile, every gesture, every word. Because I had learned something vital. What people say is only half the story. The rest is written in the silence between sentences, in the way their eyes dart when no one else is watching, in the tone they don't mean to reveal. And my daughter-in-law? Her silences screamed louder than her laughter. That was when the fear began to take root in me. Not fear of her, but fear of what she might be willing to do. That night began like any other gathering, at least on the surface. The house was filled with the hum of voices, the scraping of chairs, the clatter of dishes being set out in careful rows. Laughter echoed from the living room where my son and a few relatives swapped stories, their words overlapping in bursts of good-natured noise. The smell of roasted chicken, buttered rolls, and seasoned vegetables drifted through the air, heavy and comforting, the kind of scent that should have made a family feel safe, connected, and warm. But comfort was the last thing I felt. I sat at the table, arranging napkins to keep my hands busy, while my eyes followed her every move. My daughter-in-law floated between the kitchen and the dining room like she was orchestrating a performance, her voice pitched high and cheerful. To anyone else, she looked like the perfect hostess, smiling, offering seconds, complimenting someone's outfit, laughing just a little too loud at every joke. But I had learned to listen beyond the noise. To me, her cheer sounded hollow, rehearsed, like a line read from a script. Her mother sat near the head of the table, posture stiff, chin raised, surveying the room as though she owned every brick in the walls. She hardly spoke to me, only flicked her eyes in my direction now and again, just long enough to remind me of her disdain. I had grown used to that look, the same one she had given me from the day we met, as though I were less than her, unworthy of standing in her presence, let alone being family. As dinner was cleared away, the conversation shifted, looser, louder, fueled by the wine already poured. That was when my daughter-in-law's voice rang out above the chatter. "Let me get everyone a fresh drink," she said, her tone sweet, her smile wide. My son chuckled, thinking nothing of it, and I forced myself to nod along, though a flicker of unease sparked in my chest. She disappeared into the kitchen, carrying the empty glasses with her. I listened closely, the faint clink of bottles against the counter, the pour of liquid into glass. It should have been nothing, an ordinary sound in an ordinary evening. But the seconds stretched longer than they should have. Far too long. When she returned, tray in hand, she moved slowly, deliberately, as though savoring the moment. One by one, she placed the glasses before us, her smile unwavering. And then she came to me. She set the glass down gently, almost tenderly, her hand lingering on the stem just a moment too long. Her eyes met mine, and the corners of her mouth curled upward in a way that made my stomach turn. "A special treat for my favorite mother-in-law," she said, her voice light, almost playful. But the words landed heavy, sharp, coated in something unspoken. A ripple of laughter moved around the table, harmless to everyone else, but to me, the sound felt like knives scraping across glass. My fingers itched to pull the drink away, but I forced them still. I looked down at the liquid, glistening beneath the chandelier, shimmering like it was taunting me. My chest tightened. I could feel my heart beating against my ribs, steady but loud, loud enough I thought someone might hear. Was I imagining it? Was I letting years of tension twist something ordinary into something dangerous? My son's laughter filled the air again, easy and innocent, and I glanced at him, wishing I could borrow just a fraction of his blindness. But then I remembered every look, every smirk, every word she'd ever spoken to remind me I was not wanted. I remembered the cookbook, the perfume, the gatherings I'd been left out of. I remembered her mother's voice, calling me worthless like it was nothing. And then I looked back at that glass. Oh no, this wasn't my imagination. My throat went dry. I shifted in my chair, forcing myself to smile, forcing myself to look casual, normal, unbothered. And then, with the calmness of someone who had already survived too much to be rattled easily, I made my choice. While the conversation carried on around me, while my son laughed at something his cousin said, while no one paid attention to my hands, I slid the glass a few inches across the table. Her mother, deep in conversation about some trivial story, didn't notice. When the switch was done, my pulse eased slightly, though the weight of what I had just done pressed down on me. The glass meant for me now sat before her. The same woman who had once taken pleasure in reducing me to nothing more than a word, worthless. I leaned back in my chair, steadying my breathing, masking the storm within me. She lifted her glass, toasting casually to nothing in particular, and I held mine up as well, the liquid untouched, my smile painted on like a mask. No one noticed. No one questioned. The evening carried on with laughter, stories, and clinking glasses. But I watched the clock, every tick a reminder that something was about to happen. 35 minutes. That was all it would take. And as I waited, I wondered, had I just saved myself, or had I crossed a line I could never step back from? If this were your family, would you have switched the glasses like I did? Comment below, because sometimes I wonder if I was too cold or too clever. The minutes that followed felt stretched thin, as though time itself were aware of what I had done. I sat there, glass in hand, smiling when someone told a joke, nodding politely at a story, pretending to listen when my son leaned in to share some detail from his week. But behind my mask, every nerve in me was alert. I kept glancing at the clock above the mantel, the ticking second hand echoing in my mind louder than the laughter around me. 35 minutes. That was the number burned into my thoughts. 35 minutes to know if my suspicion was justified, 35 minutes to see whether I had acted on paranoia or on instinct. I forced myself to sip from my water instead, my untouched glass sitting before me like an ornament. I could feel the weight of it, though I never raised it to my lips. I told myself to breathe, to stay steady, to blend into the flow of the evening. Yet every time her voice rose above the others, every time she laughed, I felt my eyes drawn back to her. My daughter-in-law sat there, bright and animated, her hand brushing my son's arm, her smile flashing effortlessly at the others. If anyone else looked at her, they would see warmth. But I knew. I had seen too much, felt too much, to fall for her act. And then, the shift began. It was subtle at first. Her mother set her glass down a little too heavily, as though her grip faltered. She cleared her throat, straightened her back, and waved a dismissive hand when someone asked if she was all right. But I saw it, the sheen of sweat forming on her brow, the way her eyes darted to the side as if trying to steady the room. A few more minutes passed, and the signs grew undeniable. She fanned herself, tugged at the collar of her blouse, her voice breaking slightly as she tried to keep up with the conversation. Her laugh came out uneven, jagged, as though it cost her something to produce the sound. A cousin sitting nearby leaned closer, concerned, asking if she wanted water. She brushed it off, pride intact, insisting she was fine. But she wasn't fine. Her hands trembled as she reached again for the glass, and when she tried to lift it, it nearly slipped from her fingers. That was when my son noticed. His face softened with worry, his voice carrying over the table. "Are you okay? You don't look so good." And then it happened. The shift from discomfort to chaos. Her words came out slurred, her face pale and damp, her breathing uneven. She swayed in her chair before grabbing the table for balance, her rings clinking against the wood as she steadied herself. The laughter around the table died instantly, replaced by gasps, chairs scraping back, voices overlapping in confusion. Family members rushed to her side, calling her name, patting her back, demanding answers she couldn't give. Someone hurried to grab a damp cloth, another reached for the phone, ready to call for help. The once cheerful dining room had transformed into a storm of panic, everyone caught in the swirl of her unraveling state. I sat still. My hands folded neatly in my lap, my eyes steady, my heart a drumbeat of mixed emotions. I should have felt relief, vindication, triumph even. But what I felt instead was a strange heaviness, the kind that comes when justice wears a face you didn't choose. Watching her own mother falter, collapse beneath the weight of what was never meant for her, was almost unbearable. Almost. Across the table, my daughter-in-law sprang into action, or at least she tried to. She leaned close, her hands fluttering as though she didn't know where to place them, her voice too high, too frantic. "Mom, are you okay? What's happening? Somebody do something." Her words were laced with alarm, but her eyes betrayed her. For a fraction of a second, when she thought no one was watching, her face faltered. The fear there wasn't just for her mother, it was for herself. Her expression cracked, revealing the guilt buried beneath layers of practiced charm. And in that brief slip, I saw it. She knew. She knew what had happened, even if no one else at that table did. My son hovered helplessly beside her, torn between confusion and urgency. His hand rested on her shoulder as he tried to steady her, his eyes darting between his wife and her mother, completely blind to the storm raging beneath the surface. He saw only the woman he loved, panicked and distraught, and the mother-in-law he'd always respected now suddenly weakened before his eyes. The truth was invisible to him, and part of me wished it could remain that way, because to see it would mean shattering the family he believed he had built. I kept my silence. I didn't flinch, didn't rise, didn't reveal the part one had played. Instead, I sat in that chair, still and calm, watching as the scene unfolded before me. And deep down, in the quiet corners of my heart, I knew everything had changed. Watching her own mother suffer from what she meant for me was almost unbearable. If you believe no mother-in-law deserves to be treated this way, please subscribe. It helps me keep sharing stories that too many women stay silent about. I remember sitting in the living room later that night, the house finally quiet after all the chaos. My son had driven his mother-in-law to the emergency room, and my daughter-in-law trailed behind him, still putting on that act of worry. I stayed behind. I didn't offer to go, didn't even pretend. I just sat there in the stillness, staring at the empty glasses on the counter, knowing one of them could have been the end of me. When the front door finally opened again, hours later, they slipped inside with hushed voices. I stayed seated in the dark, pretending to doze, though every word reached me. My son's voice was heavy, full of confusion. "The doctors think it was just something she ate," he said, his tone almost convincing himself. But then I caught his wife's sharp whisper, "Don't say anything. She'll twist this against me." I froze. What exactly did she mean by that? Twist what? My heart thudded as I realized I wasn't just imagining her intentions. She knew what she had done, and she was worried I'd figured it out. Later that week, while helping fold laundry upstairs, I overheard another exchange between them. My son was frustrated, his voice louder than usual. "Why do you treat her like this? She's my mother. She's been nothing but respectful to you." And her reply sliced through me. "Respectful? She hovers. She acts like this house is hers. You don't see it, but she makes me feel small in my own home. Maybe if she wasn't always around, we'd have some peace." Her words stung deeper than I expected. I had bent myself backward, trying to give her space, tried not to interfere in their marriage, cooked when asked, babysat when needed, and quietly retreated when I sensed I was unwanted. And still, it wasn't enough. To her, my existence was the problem. That night, I sat in my bedroom replaying moments I'd brushed aside. The afternoon when she handed me a green smoothie she'd claimed was good for my joints, but it tasted unusually bitter. The casserole she insisted I try first at a family cookout, even though I was the only one she served from a separate dish. The way she always watched me closely when I sipped from a glass she had poured. How many times had I been blind to her schemes? How many close calls had I ignored because I didn't want to believe someone in my own family could harbor that much hate? But the real confirmation came not from me, but from her own mother. I didn't expect to hear it, but sometimes the truth has a way of slipping out when people think no one is listening. I was setting the table one afternoon when I heard raised voices in the backyard. Her mother's tone was sharp, almost panicked. What did you put in my drink that night? You could have killed me. I froze, the fork in my hand trembling. My daughter-in-law's response was frantic, defensive. It wasn't meant for you. You don't understand. She makes everything harder. She takes over, she acts superior, and I'm the one left invisible in my own house. I just wanted one night without her shadow hanging over me. Her mother's gasp cut through the air. Are you out of your mind? That's attempted murder. Against your husband's mother, no less. And then came the silence, the kind of silence that says everything words can't. I backed away before they noticed I had heard. My chest was pounding so hard I thought it might give me away. In that moment, the truth was undeniable. The smoothie, the casserole, the drink that night, it hadn't been paranoia. It was a pattern. And I had narrowly escaped it more than once. When my son returned home later that evening, his wife clung to his arm, her voice soft and pitiful. Mom's exaggerating again. She's been dramatic ever since the hospital. She's just trying to stir up trouble. But something in his eyes told me he wasn't entirely convinced. Seeds of doubt had been planted, and no matter how hard she tried to water over them with lies, the truth was sprouting through. And that's when I realized this wasn't the kind of war that ended with a single confrontation. This was a battle of patience, silence, and timing. The more she tried to hide her intentions, the more her own cracks showed. All I had to do was wait, and she'd reveal herself completely. But waiting didn't erase the ache in my chest. To know my daughter-in-law hated me enough to wish me gone, to plot it quietly while smiling to my face, it broke something inside me. I thought of the years I had spent protecting my son, raising him with love, praying he'd find happiness in marriage. And here I was, living under the shadow of a woman who wanted me erased from the picture entirely. And yet, I told myself, revenge doesn't always come with shouting or threats. Sometimes, the strongest revenge is silence. Silence while they expose themselves. Silence while the world sees the truth. Silence while they choke on the consequences of their own actions. So I waited. And I watched. And I held on to the quiet satisfaction that sooner or later, her mask would slip for everyone to see. I sat in the quiet of my living room the next morning, hands folded neatly in my lap, staring at nothing. The house was still, but inside me, a storm raged. The night before had revealed more than I was prepared to face, but instead of fear, I felt something else, clarity. I had seen what she was capable of. I had tasted the venom she carried behind her smile. But I made a decision in that moment. I would not scream. I would not accuse. I would not lower myself to her level. Silence would be my weapon, and patience my shield. Every encounter after that became a test of endurance. I wrote things down, dates, words, the way her eyes flickered when I entered a room. Each entry was deliberate, a record that no one else knew I was keeping. I wasn't just living my life anymore. I was building a wall of proof, brick by brick, without ever raising suspicion. When we gathered for family meals, I remained calm. I watched her pour drinks for others, her hands trembling slightly, and I let her see that I noticed. I would smile, just a little, and then shift my eyes away, as though I were hiding something of my own. That subtle reminder that I was watching aided her more than any confrontation ever could. She wanted me cornered, but now she was the one backed into shadows. Behind the scenes, I sought counsel with a lawyer I trusted. I didn't storm into the office in desperation. I walked in with composure, explaining everything carefully. Together, we made sure my assets were protected. My house, my savings, even the inheritance I planned for my son, all shielded from any manipulation she might have attempted. I signed documents with steady hands, knowing each signature secured my future and weakened her grip. And then I began weaving my quiet revenge into ordinary conversations. When she mentioned groceries, I'd murmur, "Funny how people always reveal themselves when they think no one is looking." At the dinner table, if she asked about my health, I'd smile and say, "Stronger than some might expect." I never accused her directly, but each word carried weight. Each look pierced deeper than any accusation. It worked. Slowly, I watched her unravel. Her paranoia grew with every passing day. She flinched when I entered a room. She avoided pouring me drinks altogether. She whispered more harshly with her mother, and even her once confident tone when addressing my son began to waver. Her mother, still weakened from the night of the switched glass, had changed too. She no longer looked at me with disdain. Shame colored her face when our eyes met, as though she was reminded daily of the moment she had suffered because of her daughter's cruelty. She kept her distance, hesitant and uneasy, knowing I carried knowledge she could never unlearn. And my son, my sweet boy, began to notice. He saw the way she bristled at my presence, the way her voice rose a little too quickly when I entered the room. He asked questions, gentle at first. Mom, is everything okay? Later, more serious. Why does she seem so nervous around you? I didn't answer directly. Instead, I looked at him with tired but steady eyes and said, sometimes the truth reveals itself if you just wait long enough. That was all. No yelling, no scenes, no accusations. I had no need to expose her openly. She was doing that all on her own. My silence became a mirror, and every time she looked into it, she saw the reflection of her own guilt staring back. I never needed to shout to make my presence known. I never needed to argue to prove I was strong. By refusing to be a victim, I made her the prisoner of her own choices. And in that silence, I found my justice. I never raised my voice, but I refused to be a victim. If you believe every strong woman deserves to have her voice heard, please share this video. Too many of us suffer in silence. When I look back on everything, I realize I never needed to raise my voice or create a spectacle. The revenge came not from me shouting the truth, but from me holding it quietly in my hands like a blade hidden in plain sight. I learned that silence, when chosen with strength, speaks louder than any scream ever could. In the weeks that followed, her carefully constructed mask began to crack in ways no one could ignore. My son caught her in half-truths about money, noticed inconsistencies in her stories, and watched her fumble nervously when ordinary questions arose. She grew short-tempered, restless, paranoid. The lies she thought she had buried so deeply started surfacing one by one, clawing their way into daylight. I never exposed her, not once. She did it all on her own. My son began distancing himself, confusion turning into suspicion, and suspicion into something sharper, disappointment. Their marriage, once dressed up in forced smiles and shallow gestures, began to unravel thread by thread. By the time her mother tried to smooth things over, it was already too late. My daughter-in-law had built her house of cards on deceit, and I had simply stood still long enough for the wind of truth to blow it down. I never had to lift a finger. I never had to poison her back, or shout accusations in front of family, or even confess what I knew. She destroyed her own foundation by thinking she could destroy mine. And so, the morals stood clear to me. Betrayal always carries its own punishment. Trust once broken cannot be patched with excuses, and true strength doesn't come from revenge that screams, but from revenge that waits in silence, patient and steady. Too many women are underestimated, treated as though their silence means weakness. But silence, when chosen with intent, is not weakness. It is power. It is control. It is survival. In the end, she thought she was serving me poison, but instead, she drank her own downfall. Thank you for staying with me through this painful story. If my silence spoke to you, then let your voice be heard. Like, comment, and subscribe so more women know they're not alone.